At 82 years old, Jessi Colter has carried a secret for most of her life. A secret tied not only to her marriage, but to the very soul of country music itself. For decades, she stood quietly beside the man the world called the Outlaw King. Waylon Jennings, the voice that defied Nashville, the rebel who changed the rules of country forever. But behind the legend was a man haunted. And behind that man was a woman who bore his truth in silence. Now, after a lifetime of loyalty and loss, Jessi Colter has finally spoken, revealing a story that reshapes how we understand one of country music's greatest icons. This is not a tale of fame and fortune. It's a story of guilt, love, and the unbearable weight of a few words that would haunt Waylon Jennings until the day he died. Soft instrumental fades under narration. Part 1. A Rebel is Born. Waylon Jennings was never meant to blend in. Born in Littlefield, Texas in 1937, he grew up restless, a boy with a guitar and a dream too big for the cotton fields that surrounded him. By the time he was 12, he was performing on local radio. By 16, he was working as a disc jockey, spinning country hits and dreaming of writing his own. He wasn't polished, he wasn't refined, but he was real. And that authenticity would become both his gift and his curse. In the late 1950s, fate brought Waylon into the orbit of a rising rock and roll star, Buddy Holly. Holly saw something in the young Texan, a raw, unshakable rhythm, and a rebellious streak that mirrored his own. He hired Waylon to play bass, and together they hit the road. For Waylon, it was a dream come true. For Buddy Holly, it was a final tour. On February 3, 1959, that dream turned into a nightmare. After a long night in Iowa, Holly chartered a small plane to reach the next show in Minnesota. Waylon was supposed to be on that flight, but at the last moment, he gave up his seat to J.P., the big bopper Richardson, who was sick and desperate to avoid another freezing bus ride. It was a simple act of kindness, one that would change Waylon's life forever. When news broke that the plane had crashed, killing Holly, Richie Valens, and the big bopper, Waylon was devastated. He wasn't on that plane, but his heart was. And the last words he'd exchanged with Buddy Holly would become the ghost that followed him for the rest of his life. Holly had teased him before takeoff, saying, "I hope your old bus freezes up." And Waylon, joking back, had replied, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." Hours later, the plane was down. Everyone aboard was dead, and Waylon Jennings never laughed at that kind of joke again. To the outside world, it was just coincidence. To Waylon, it was a curse. Part 2. The Making of an Outlaw. In the years that followed, Waylon tried to bury his guilt in work. He played honky-tonks, radio shows, and small venues across Texas and Arizona, chasing the music, but never escaping the past. The industry called him promising. But he wanted more than promise. He wanted freedom. By the early 1970s, Waylon was ready to take on Nashville itself. The record labels wanted control. The producers dictated what musicians played, how they sounded, even what they wore. But Waylon refused to play by those rules. He demanded creative control, a move almost unheard of at the time. The suits said no. Waylon said fine, and walked away. That defiance became the spark that ignited a movement. With his 1973 album Honky Tonk Heroes, Jennings helped create what would become known as Outlaw Country, music that was raw, honest, and unapologetically human. He sang about sin and salvation, love and loss, truth and betrayal, songs that felt lived in because they were. The movement grew. Waylon joined forces with Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, and Chris Christopherson to form the Highwaymen. Four giants who stood shoulder to shoulder, unafraid to challenge Nashville's polish with grit and soul. To fans, Waylon was a hero. To the industry, a problem. And to Jessi Colter, the woman who stood beside him, he was both. Part 3. Jessi Coulter, the woman behind the legend. Jessi Coulter was not just a country star's wife. Born Miriam Johnson in Phoenix, Arizona, she had already carved her own name in country music with her 1975 hit, I'm Not Lisa. Her voice was haunting, a blend of sorrow, grace, and strength. When she met Waylon in 1969, it was as if fire met its match. He was magnetic, unpredictable, a storm in boots and denim. She was tender but fierce, a woman who could see through the chaos to the soul underneath. Their love was electric and dangerous. Waylon's addictions grew alongside his fame. Cocaine, pills, alcohol. The outlaw life was as reckless as it was romantic. He once admitted to spending more than $1,000 a day on cocaine, bleeding his finances and his health dry. Behind closed doors, Jessi became his anchor. She paid the bills when he couldn't, soothed his paranoia, and tried to protect the man the world idolized. Fans saw the outlaw king, strong, defiant, untouchable. Jessi saw the cracks, the guilt, the sleepless nights, the fear. Their duets, like Storms Never Last, weren't just songs. They were messages, love letters written in melody, confessions between two people fighting to stay whole. Part 4. The silence that grew louder. As Waylon's fame exploded, so did his darkness. The drugs were only part of it. Jessi began to notice moments when he'd retreat into silence, pacing rooms alone, eyes distant and cold. At first, she thought it was exhaustion or paranoia, but over time, she realized it was something deeper, something he couldn't name. Some nights, he would whisper things that made her blood run cold. He spoke of debts, of choices he couldn't undo, of people he feared might one day come for him. But one fear overshadowed them all. The night the plane went down. Jessi later revealed that Waylon's guilt over Buddy Holly's death never left him. In private, he told her he believed he had caused the crash, that his words had cursed the flight. She tried to comfort him, to remind him that fate cannot be controlled by a sentence spoken in jest. But Waylon never believed her. He carried that guilt like a scar, invisible, but deep. When the cocaine wore off and the crowds disappeared, it was there, waiting for him. He'd wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, whispering Holly's name. The drugs weren't indulgence. They were escape. The rebellion wasn't performance. It was punishment. Waylon wasn't defying Nashville anymore. He was defying himself. Part 5. The secret he could never outrun. In his final years, Waylon's body began to fail him. Diabetes, exhaustion, and years of abuse had taken their toll. But even as his health declined, he never stopped working. He recorded. He toured. He sang as if he could outpace the ghosts chasing him. But the ghost always won. After Waylon's death in 2002, Jessi Colter was left with a choice: to keep his secret buried forever, or to finally release it. For nearly 20 years, she chose silence. Not because she feared judgment, but because she wanted to protect him. To the fans, Waylon was a rebel, a pioneer, a hero. To reveal his deepest guilt, she thought, might diminish that legacy. But time changed her perspective. As she grew older, she began to realize that silence wasn't protection. It was prison. In her own words, Jessi said she came to understand that telling the truth was not betrayal. It was love. Part 6. The Confession. When Jessi Colter finally spoke, her words carried the weight of 4 decades. She told the world what Waylon had told her in the dead of night, that he believed he was responsible for Buddy Holly's death. It wasn't logic. It was pain. He couldn't shake the belief that his words, spoken in jest, had doomed his friend. He never forgave himself. Jessi revealed that the guilt shaped everything that came after. The drugs, the excess, the rebellion, even the music. His outlaw songs were not anthems of arrogance, but confessions of remorse. Every lyric about sin, every verse about redemption, they were his penance. She spoke softly, not to tarnish his name, but to show the man beneath the myth, the man who had carried a burden too heavy for one soul, the man who turned guilt into art and pain into poetry. Part 7. The Legend Redefined. The revelation doesn't erase Waylon Jennings' legacy. If anything, it deepens it. For decades, the outlaw image stood unshaken. The black leather vests, the thundering baritone, the unbreakable defiance. But now we understand what that defiance really was. Not arrogance, but armor. The rebellion wasn't a pose. It was a defense against guilt, fear, and regret. Waylon Jennings didn't live fearless. He lived haunted. And still, he gave the world music that spoke of truth, struggle, and redemption. Jesse Coulter's revelation reframes his story, transforming him from a larger-than-life outlaw into something far more human. A man trying and failing to forgive himself. A man whose music became his confessional booth. A man whose greatest rebellion was simply surviving his own conscience. Part 8. A Final Act of Love. When Jessi broke her silence at 82, it wasn't for attention. It was for peace, for Waylon, who had carried guilt like a cross, and for herself, after decades of protecting a secret that had nearly broken her. She knew the truth would change how the world saw him, but she also knew it would finally free him from the shadows. The man behind the outlaw was not untouchable. He was fragile, flawed, and achingly human. And perhaps that's what makes his story so enduring. Because, in the end, legends aren't remembered for their perfection. They're remembered for their truth. Music swells softly. Acoustic guitar fades in. Narrator, softly. Waylon Jennings will always be the outlaw king, the man who defied Nashville, who carved his own path through the heart of American music. But now, we also see the man behind the crown, a man haunted by a single night in 1959, and a few words he could never take back. Through Jessi Colter's voice, the myth gives way to the truth, and in that truth, Waylon Jennings becomes not just a legend, but a man who, despite his ghosts, left behind music powerful enough to outlive them all.